I'm your host, Nadine of 818 Events, and this is 818 and Conversate. Every episode is going to feel like a spontaneous road trip with your closest friends. Bring your luggage because we'll be unpacking everything. I'm going to be joined by an awesome passenger every now and then, and who knows, we might even pick up a hitchhiker along the way. Picture this, you're vibing, spilling the tea, storytelling, reminiscing, manifesting even. There might also be a little detour of controversy here and there, and we may even have to pump the brakes when shit gets too real. But it will always be a good-ass conversation and the road trip that you don't want to end. Episodes will drop the 8th and the 18th of every month, so in the spirit of a dope road trip, be sure to grab your travel snacks, crank up the volume, hop in the whip, and let's ride! Okay, so this is 818 and Conversate, and this is actually episode number 9. And I am here with Nicole Devel.
Hi.
She's going to tell you who she is and what she's all about. But I'm excited about this episode because I actually wanted to have you on the pod. I asked you like a little while back.
A while ago, like a couple months ago.
Yeah, so I'm excited to have you on. And just some background, we met because I attended a workshop that you were, I guess, hosting, right? Where you were actually the feature of the workshop.
Yes.
And I sat down, I had no idea what to expect. And I brought a few friends because we were like, let's go together, let's figure out this experience together. And we all had no idea what to expect. And we sat down and this voice just started. First of all, you were like this beauty.
Thank you.
Yeah, you were just this beauty. But then your voice kicked in and this like sultry, calming voice just like filled the room. And following that, you shared a lot about, your personal life, some of your challenges and struggles, and then kind of like what you've shed to get to where you are now. And you opened up a lot of people that day. I remember a lot of tears, a lot of sharing, a lot of vulnerability. It was really quite an experience. So I'm really excited to have you on here because I think people need to know who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
You also, when COVID kicked in, I also had you do like a little workshop with some colleagues and stuff as well, which was like really refreshing because it was such a weird time and like frame of mind to be in at that time. But introduce yourself a little bit more. Tell everybody who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I am Nicole Devel, and I am a spiritual guide, and I've been in the life coaching space for about 3 years now. So working with people one-on-one on really helping them unravel the truth of who they are and create a container for non-judgment and understanding. And I find in those containers, people get a chance to really like unravel and shed. And even in that workshop, I remember one of the most pivotal things that we did was we had everyone sort of write down something that they were really struggling with, that they weren't quite ready to share in front of the group. And we read them and we had no idea where those sort of confessions were coming from. But I think what it did was help people realize that we're all struggling so much and that there's so much relatability and community. And so that's like a huge part of the work that I do. And since I've been working one-on-one, I've run group programs in, understanding women's cycles and in astrology and in really fostering self-development. And recently birthed Oracle City, which is a spiritual conscious platform, and connecting to like creative consciousness and higher vibrational living. And so, that's me.
Honestly, if anybody has ever met you, like, I feel like they just want to gravitate towards you all the time. No, seriously. Nice. So tell me what, like, led you to, like, get into this realm of life coaching and all of this spiritual development and stuff. Yeah,
I think it was being in a world where I was, like, living hard and fast, and it was really fun for a long time, but living hard and fast gets old. And, I studied journalism and kind of dabbled in a bit of television, and then I traveled, and but I think throughout that whole time, I was always kind of just drinking and having a good time and looking for the next place to go out or the next place to travel. It was always like I was always searching for something.
Adrenaline kick too, right? All the time.
Yeah, or just always like searching for something outside of me to like make me feel full. And then I was living out west for a little while with an ex-partner and still doing the same thing kind of like 5 years later, and was really reflective about my own life and took some courses that were really pivotal, and I was just done. Like, I was done with a lot of the patterns, and I got my first certification in coaching in the end of 2017, beginning of 2018, and that just started pivoting my relationship to health. And then when you start to take care of you, things start to open up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would say it was just a long run of living hard and fast, and you kind of hit this. That wasn't quite my rock bottom yet. It was about another year later where I was like, okay, I had to make some huge shifts, but it was the beginning of figuring out that I really wanted to work in service and work with people.
It's funny because I think it was episode 3, I sat down with Maria, and the whole topic of that episode was soaking it all up. And it came, the conversation came to a point where we were talking about, like, the people that we keep around us and the decisions that we make for ourselves and all of that. Like, you're either soaking up all this negativity or you're soaking up all this positivity. And you have to make all those individual choices. So just hearing you say kind of, eventually everything just kind of felt like negative and more like rock bottom, that you had to shift to a different place, because after that you're just absorbing all of this negativity around you that, like, where else do you have to go but up, kind of, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think, like, it's easy to stay the same, and it's easy to waste time, and it's easy to keep doing the things you've been doing. It takes hard work and courage to look at your life and say, okay, I need to make huge changes. And I was bored. I was, like, bored with my life. Yeah. I really was. Like, I was just bored. So.
Yeah. When we first started this podcast, we talked a lot about the comfort zone, and then I did a whole little episode for number 2, just about the comfort zone and getting out of it. And, eventually you get to a place where, like, you plateau, right? And it can become boring, or it can become a little bit dangerous as well, right?
For sure.
So, if you don't pivot and figure out something, you're stuck there. So, you're very open. We were talking just before we started recording, but you're very open about sharing your story about some of the, the darker places you were in. And, this, like, fast, hard life. So you talk about sobriety, and, I would love for everybody to kind of have a frame of reference as to what you mean when you talk about it, because people have their own interpretations of what that means.
For sure. So I think it's great to pull apart that stigma, right? Because I don't think from an observation or perception standpoint, you would kind of see me out in the world and say, hey, like, okay, this woman's sober and she hit rock bottom. I like pulling it apart, because the truth of addiction, alcoholism, alcohol abuse is really just recurring a pattern that is self-harm, right? When we talk about sobriety, it's about making a choice to pivot away from abusing your own well-being, and that's your mental well-being, your physical well-being, your spiritual well-being. I think, and this is so subjective to every person, there's sort of this exploratory phase from, say, 19 to 25 or whatnot. And when I was having a good time, I wasn't really thinking about those choices, and that was totally okay. But then I started to really wake up as I was starting to mature into my life, that these choices are not making me happy. I was dealing with a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of self-loathing. Now I'm very clear on the reasons I was drinking, or the reasons I was smoking pot, or the reasons I was taking.
Because you were able to step away and look at it from the outside in, right?
For sure. And, like, why was I doing recreational drugs? And a lot of it came from the personality defects that I viewed as not possible unless I was partaking, right? So, like, I think a lot of people indulge in marijuana because they don't feel or believe they can be creative without it. That was a huge element for me. I didn't feel I could be creative without it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, with alcohol, it was like I felt I couldn't be confident in a social setting if I didn't have it. The truth is I should be able to go to a social setting and have my own personal sense of self-confidence, and I should believe that creativity comes from an innate place within me. I don't necessarily need to have something to
fill that void.
Exactly. So, I mean, I definitely am clear that alcohol and drugs were a huge part of my life, and they had more power over me than I had power over it. And you start to learn that in your journey of sobriety. And sobriety is a spiritual choice and a spiritual path, and I can't really take people down that road if I'm not willing to do it. And it's a huge act of courage and self-love. But yeah, I think if and when you hear someone getting sober, understand that they've made a choice. That's probably one of the most difficult things that they can do so that they can love and take care of themselves. And it doesn't mean that they were homeless or they had a debilitating addiction. Yeah, it just means that...
Or even necessarily anything obvious to other people, right?
Right, exactly. I wasn't, like, wildly destroying my life. That's always something that I like to speak about. But if I continued down that path, I probably could or would have.
It's funny because, just hearing you speak about that, there's a few other things that fall in line with that, right? Like people have addictions to spending and to, even sex. Like
100%.
These are things that people don't feel fulfilled unless they take part in these things, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't necessarily categorize them as the same like thing when you think about them off the top of your head. You don't think of like spending as an addiction, right?
Absolutely.
But I see people go into very dark places or very dangerous zones just because of those addictions.
Yeah.
But they don't feel like that's something that affects them the same way that, recreational drug use would or drinking.
Absolutely,
right?
It does. And really what addiction is continuously choosing a harmful behavior and then expecting a different result and doing it over and over again and expecting a different result.
I'm going to spin off of that for 1 second. I just thought of something that you're saying that. When you say that, what is your perspective on people that somebody might look at and say you're in a toxic relationship, and it might not be because it's abusive, or it might not be because, financially or anything like that. But when maybe somebody that's in a relationship that has no boundaries or isn't actually elevating or growing into something else. Like, do you think that that's similar to that, to the addiction?
It is, 100%. So we get addicted to also our stimulation factor, right? And stimulation isn't always necessarily positive. Stimulation can be highly negative, highly toxic. And that is, I've been reading a lot about codependency and like the attachment theory. And what happens is we are constantly being activated the same way we would be if we were activated by drugs or alcohol, right? It's a high, and we're addicted to that high that someone can give us, and then we're crashing.
Yep.
And it's the same way as when we're abusing something physical. So absolutely toxic relationships. And this word toxic has become very mainstream.
Yeah, very
right?
thrown around. Yeah,
but it's just a matter of understanding secure attachments and healthy relationships. But for sure, imbalanced relationships are just in the same realm as addiction and abuse.
Yeah, I was just curious. I just wanted your perspective on that because I just thought of it when you were talking about doing the same thing.
It's
that
a cycle,
right?
Yeah.
And I've thought about relationships that I've been in the past where it was kind of like that codependency, and you're codependent on something that's not even good for you. Then that's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah, it's interesting when we think of our healthy choices. I think there's sort of sometimes this view of like being healthy is boring, right? Having healthy relationships can be boring, or choosing a healthy lifestyle can seem boring. And it's even spirituality too, there's this idea around it that it has to go a certain way. But the truth is healthy is cool. Like being healthy is cool for you.
I'm with it. I'm with it, especially mental health. So let's get into the spirituality topic. You are very multifaceted, right? So your life coaching, I've learned, doesn't always necessarily come from a spiritual base. It comes also from like, some science and all these things that we're talking about right now. But talk to me about spirituality, because I feel like for you, that is a very prominent part of your world.
Yeah.
So share kind of like, what your belief on spirituality is for somebody, and kind of like what that experience is like for you personally.
Yeah, I think it's such a personal choice. When I look at spirituality in my life, it's being able to turn over my suffering, my frustration, my pain, to something bigger than myself all the time. Like spirituality is being able to say, okay, when this person triggers me in a way, I'm gonna pause, I'm gonna take a moment, I'm gonna really understand what's going on with me and do my best to respond instead of react. Or if I'm really feeling shitty because of some choices that I've been making, I'm gonna do my best to eat healthy so that I can nourish my body. Like spirituality is a constant choice to honor yourself. It's not about being on Headspace or going to therapy all the time. It's about who are you choosing to be in every facet of your life, and how willing are you to admit your faults, your wrongs,
to yourself,
everything. So a part of what I really want to do is break that stigma as well, because I think, even through COVID, there's been this huge awakening of spirituality, and there is a wave of ascension. People are starting to wake up. There's no doubt about it. But it is about wholeness. as an individual so that you can vibrate at a level that's affecting others and therefore creating sort of that wave or that repercussion that is waking up others, like other people.
Yeah, I don't know that I understood about vibrations in the sense of like spirituality before as much as I probably do in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Dating Keith has been an opening to that. When I sat down with Maria, we talked about vibrations and that they're a real thing, and that again, it goes back to the soaking it up, right? Like who you keep around you, their energy really pours into you and vice versa. And if you have like poor vibrations around you, like you're feeding off of that.
For sure.
And as an individual, if you're not making choices that take care of you on all levels, exactly what you're saying, your whole being, then that can really start to weigh on you. So what has your personal connection to spirituality been like? Like is it like religion based? Is it, you are very big in astrology. Is it astrology based? Is it, fill me in, tell me about it.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say
And does your work, and sorry to cut you off, does your work come from a very spiritual base when you're doing these one-on-one coaching sessions and stuff?
Absolutely, yeah. So I would completely eliminate religion. I've never been religious at all. I think religion is beautiful because it's held in faith, but I also think sometimes it feels quite organized and almost oppressive at times, and that's just my personal opinion. I would say my spirituality definitely comes from my mental well-being and my mindset, and what am I saying and how am I connecting and how much time am I willing to get myself grounded and centered and clear. So my spirituality comes a lot from sensory living too. How am I feeling? What am I eating? What am I experiencing? How does this person feel? Like it is always coming from a feeling place. And then practices for sure. As you know, I've incorporated sound. I have meditation in my life, water therapy. So it really is sort of just an everyday choice. But I would absolutely say sobriety has been a huge turning point when it comes to my spirituality. Because if I want to make a choice in my life that is about living wholesome, clear, and willing, then it means that I have to give it up to something bigger than myself. Because willpower is not always going to get you to the places that you want to get to.
The last episode we did was called Me Versus Me, and it was more based on fitness, but it really came back to like an individual's perseverance and, funny enough, community as well, right? And that's why I think what you do is so interesting and so unique as well, because a lot of people do what you do and kind of stick to one stream, right? Where it's simply just working one-on-one with clients. And then, you do that, but you also work on building a community, creating an environment for people to be very vulnerable and share with each other, because you also, how do I say this? Like, we also don't know what other people are going through. So when we sit in a room with somebody and we hear somebody else's experience, we either can relate to that experience or open our minds to a different perspective on that experience.
Absolutely.
Because what you think you know or what you think you might feel about that can be very circumstantial, right? You may hear something that sounds one way and somebody else has a different storyline that connects with you differently. So, I've been very impressed with what you do, because you create these different streams for connecting with people in different ways. And, for anyone who hasn't experienced any of these things that you do, I highly recommend it, because it definitely was that for me. That was a very eye-opening experience. I think I got emotional on that.
I remember
that day.
You did.
It was a good experience. It was very, I don't know what the word. I'm trying to think of what the word is. Not lethargic. That's the opposite. It was very authentic. It was very humbling. I think that's a good word. You really take a step back and like reassess things internally. So to be able to do that regularly with someone like yourself, God, you got to be willing to like face things. And that's where I bring up this like me versus me stuff, because when it came to Miguel, he was talking about that internal conversation that he has with himself when he was trying to get to a place of like, who am I and where am I at right now and where do I want to be? And every day was like, even if it was just like running a little further or a little longer, it was doing something different than he did the day before.
For sure. Yeah.
From that exposure and vulnerability, he built a community, and now they have a me versus me mentality group that runs together, and like, you know, they support each other. And that's why I think what you do is so unique, because it's like kind of the same, you know, like what you're doing is very individual work, but you can build a community from that. So
thank you for
those
saying
dots
all
connected
that.
there.
I appreciate it.
So talk to me about this, the sound baths and the sound healing and stuff, because I'm super intrigued by it. About a year and a half ago, Keith and I actually went to celebrate kind of like my mom's passing anniversary. We went to do some like Reiki healing and stuff like that. But we went to this like crystal shop, and they had this massive wall of beautiful, I don't know what they're called. Like, what are the bowls? Are they just called bowls?
Yeah, they're like crystal sound bowls, I would say. Or there's like Tibetan singing bowls. Like they kind of come in different forms.
They just had like this wall of all these different sizes, and then this massive one. Yeah. And she like did a sample of the sound for us, and it's just like so invigorating. So tell me about this, like how you started this.
Yeah, so sound is sound's been a big part of my life for so long. I think ever since I was little, like I always wanted to sing and perform. And you know,
and that's something I literally have known you now all this time. I follow you on social media. Sorry to cut you off. Okay. And just yesterday, I saw that you do this singing business.
It's
and
fun. It's just
oh my God, and your voice is beautiful.
Thank
and
you.
It's so soulful. Like I didn't expect anything less, but I was very impressed when I saw that.
Thank
so
you.
Kudos to you. But so sound and singing has always been kind of like your
thing. Sound has always been something I think within me. And where do I start? So I've always sang here and there on the side, absolutely. And then I took a trip. Actually, before my trip, I have this one text. It's called Healing Mantras, and it's by this author named Thomas Ashley Friend. And I remember reading it once and going through, and I was like, this is magnificent. Wow, this is something that I can use, because I think what's really important is a lot of us use our voices, whether we're singing, speaking. It's just such a powerful tool, and our throat chakra is such an important part of our healing as women, or just as anybody. And I started working with like Sanskrit chanting and learning about it, and how it can work and alleviate the chakra system. So I was really fascinated by that. I did some work in sound healing, and I still do it at all of the ceremonies that we do and work with sound. But then Michelle, my partner at ceremony, she is a sound healing artist, so she plays a sound bath at every ceremony. But I actually had this really pivotal experience in Tulum in December. I went to an overnight solstice ceremony. Oh, wow. Yeah, so it was like this 9.5 hour gong sound ceremony that blew my mind. I would say some of the pillar foundations when it comes to sound is it really changes time and space. It allows your body to relax into a being of consciousness where things are starting to shift that you don't even know are shifting. Once you allow your body to physically relax, the mind starts to relax. And when we allow sound to come in, it starts to shift our subconscious from a like chakra standpoint. So when Michelle's house, her bowl's set up and she's playing, each bowl, depending on the size, is connecting to a sound that is a part of our chakra system, right? And our chakra system are these energy centers that we need to work to clear, because trauma, pain, and experiences get trapped in the body. They do. And so, there's somatic work and there's sound work. There's so much out there, but it's becoming a louder conversation that we need to release these things from our body. So sound allows you the opportunity to relax. It allows the brain to start to shift. It starts reprogramming the subconscious mind. I am an advocate for Sanskrit and chanting and sound. And then we've incorporated this into our ceremonies, and it's fantastic work.
Years ago, I was getting a massage, and I was speaking to the massage therapist, and I was actually talking about you clench your jaw, or people that have car accident injuries or something like that. Your body holds that trauma, like Absolutely. You're saying, in those places. And I remember saying to her, I get a lot of tension in my jaw. I always have since I was a kid. And she was like, oh, well, we can do a massage that alleviates your jaw and all of that. She's like, but it can be highly emotional. She's like, I want to warn you.
For sure.
It can be highly emotional. And I was a little confused by that. But what she said is that a lot of what we experience, we hold in our jaw.
For sure.
And that's part of the clenching, and that's part of, that tension. But when you release that, when you physically release that, it releases with a lot of emotion. I thought that was so interesting. And so to hear you talk about, the chakras, it's not even shocking to me anymore, because I understand that, like, we really do hold things in different parts of our body and spaces. Sure. And she related it back to car accidents, where, like, victims who are going through therapy from certain areas where trauma has happened in their body, it can also be very emotional, because there's this release of, 100%. Not only pain and discomfort, but also, like, the experience that happened that associates with it.
100%. So. And I think, a lot of what's important to me, and even with Oracle City, is having these, like, progressive conversations around what's possible, right? Like, we talk about chakras, and, there might be a couple people that watch this podcast are like, yeah, I totally know it. But not a lot of people know that this is a huge opportunity for you to grow. And so I think that that's what's important. But yes, like, have you heard of, like, the emotional freedom technique, when you're tapping and you, like, start tapping?
I've heard of it, but I haven't.
Yeah, it's like a full blown like epidemic.
We might have to come check out some of these.
Start tapping, like, your face and your chest. It feels tapping so in the background. Good. It feels so good. But people will start doing, like, this EFT and like start crying, because
they're releasing things.
Trauma gets so trapped in the body. Yeah.
Maybe we need to do that on another episode. We'll have you back and we'll do a whole experience.
Oh my God, the amount of topics that could bring.
So talk to me about Oracle City. What was the, like, origination of it? I mean, your whole social media platform even kind of, like, shifted as well, right? Like, just following you, a lot of your page was about you and exposing yourself, and not you being, like, with ego. It was you exposing yourself and being very vulnerable. And then also sharing with people, like, who you are and what you do, because you want to engage with people so that they know that they can reach out, right? But it shifted.
Yeah.
It shifted to this Oracle City, stuff. You're going to share it. And it catches my attention, and crazy enough, like, I stop and listen to every single, like, I'll be skimming on my feed sometimes, and every time I see one of those posts, I stop and listen, because I'm intrigued with what you have to say. But also, like, I just like listening to Nicole talk. I can literally just close my eyes and listen to her talk all day.
That's so nice.
But yeah, share with me, because I think it's beautiful and interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I think, actually, I'll touch on one point first. Social media has actually always been really hard for me, because it's all about the self. And I've always been someone that's like, how can it be about everyone else? Not necessarily from, like, a depleting standpoint, but from, like, how can we create more than just us? And that's why I think I struggle with social media, because it's so, like, me. And I'm like, us. So, of course, coaching one-on-one for so long was just me as a sole entity. And then Oracle City was birthed out of coming off of a really profound trip. And
that was Mexico?
Yeah. I had lost my grandmother, who was so close to me. And I think, like, we have an even deeper relationship now, from, like, a spiritual standpoint, which is great. I think she, like, pushed me to go on that trip. But, it was just birthed out of
I believe in all of that.
Yeah. It was birthed out of being clear that, so Oracle City, that it's deeply difficult to find spiritual consciousness and community in the concrete jungle. It's really hard here to find it, to feel safe to do it, to let your ego down enough that you'll show up. There's so much ego here. And it's been hard for me to find that community, and I'm so interested. And I went to Tulum, and I was there, and I was like, oh wow, I'm not an alien. Like, I'm actually accepted here. There are healers here. There was so much ceremony there, and I felt so safe because it was normal. Whereas here, it's not normalized yet. And it's important, and there's so many people that are looking for it, and that it's actually so innate within them. So it's about having a platform, spiritual conscious platform, and our whole mission is elevating spirituality and mental well-being through connection and creative consciousness. I'm a creative, and I've always been someone that's like, I like this, and I like this, and I want to try this. And it was important for me to have a space where I can dabble in all of that for myself, as well as for
share
you.
With other people.
Exactly. And for you to find the modality and the tool for you to heal, because it's so different for everyone. I've been in therapy and have mentorship for the last 3 years, but that's not what's comfortable for everybody. It could be Reiki for you. It could be sound for you. It could be coming to a ceremony for you. I want you to try something that at least starts your journey.
Yeah.
And so Oracle City is all about bringing in facilitators, running ceremony, educating you on all these different topics, but also a serious note of like your mental health and your mental well-being is important. Let me show you some of the resources so that you can get started.
Side note, is your target demographic women? Is it young women? Is it women and men? Like who do you target for these experiences?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I've done like this avatar profiling a couple times, right? And I've always been thinking more of the younger generation because I want them to grow with me.
Yeah.
I would say absolutely women gravitate to this a lot more sometimes than men do, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what's natural. It's inclusive to everybody, but I would say that I find the people who gravitate the most towards me are women 28 to 35. Like that's really who
I think it's a pivotal point in your life, right?
Yeah.
It goes back to what you were saying earlier that, you know, in your 20s, that period of that fast, hard life it's okay because it allows you to figure out what's next for you. But the thing is that eventually you hit this wall that can be very detrimental to you if you don't figure out what your next move is, because, you know, you can almost become lost in the shuffle, right? And you get to a place of comfortability with the way you've always been doing things. Or you decide, what's next for me? Am I bored? Do I want more? Do I want to stay stagnant? Do I want to stay here?
Sure.
Maybe it's not stagnant. Maybe it just feels good.
Yeah,
you know? So it's kind of interesting that is the age that is most captivated and drawn to this, because I think that's a very pivotal point, especially for women, right? We're deciding, do we want to be career women? Do we want to be mothers? Do we want to be both? Do we want to be with a partner? Do we want to do this independently?
Absolutely.
You know, or do we want to grow before we get into a partnership, right? So
yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting that is like the group that draws to it. Yeah,
and I've always been someone too that has learned and understood. You know, I started life coaching at 28, 29, and I had so many people say to me, you know, you kind of have to have some life under you to be able to guide others. And I've always been humble about the fact that, you know, I have many years to go before I can take on certain demographics. But yeah, I wasn't sure if people my age were going to trust me enough to let them know that I could teach you and guide you. Yeah. So I was like, oh, maybe it'll be a bit of a younger market. But I've been pleasantly surprised that most of the people that gravitate are in sort of my same category.
I think the thing that's interesting about what you're saying right now is that I do agree that people feel most comfortable when they feel somebody has their own experiences, you know, to be able to guide someone. Yeah. But also, your experience is also elevated by a lot of education, right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, what somebody your age that maybe is on your I guess your playing field, you know, same realm of world and things going on in their life might still be years behind you because they haven't exposed themselves to all the information and not only experiences, but just like going back to, you know, Tulum and the exposure that you had to a certain culture and that those experiences, that sets you light years ahead of somebody who's maybe the same age as you or in the same life point as you, but you know what I mean?
For sure.
So I'm curious though about, like, you know, your response from men in regards to some of this stuff. This is just kind of something I'm intrigued by because I feel like culture has taught men to be less vulnerable. And over time, that's progressively improving, I think. Society has made it become more acceptable for men to share their feelings, and like we push for that. But in terms of spirituality, and I mean, a lot of men I know really do have a focus on their health and their well-being, right? And a lot of it also comes with a connection to personal development, financial development, and, you know, growing in their careers and stuff. So it's interesting, like, what has been your connection with men in terms of this spirituality, like, journey and stuff?
So I would say one of the first things that comes to mind is sort of this embodiment. As every individual, we have sort of this feminine and this masculine energy, right? I think sometimes I show up with a lot of masculine energy and I have to be like, okay, dial it back a little bit so that I can blend or be receptive to something. So I think it's the same with men. I think that we've been sold as a culture to play our roles, and as women hold space for the feminine and as men hold space for the masculine. And I think that when it comes to spirituality and men, it's allowing men to have the grace and the space that you have feminine energy within you, and that's being able to listen or being receptive or being supportive or asking questions or taking time for you and slowing down. I think it's also a death of the ego, like how much is your ego running the show? And I think it's allowing some of those feminine qualities to come through and not be scared of them. The same way that women can be intimidated by embodying a lot of our masculine qualities and not being afraid of them. So I would say it's really about the balance of the yin and the yang. I've coached some men, and it's been profound to see that they are just as deeply sensitive or introspective as women are, and to give them a chance to be heard, but they have to be willing. I think it's also a sense of willingness when it comes to men.
I feel like there's something profound about you in particular. I'm not even just saying this to like flatter you, know what I mean? But there's something, you do allow this like sense of openness. And like I said, for anyone who's been exposed to it and been in a room with you, I can see why, it could be challenging for someone to feel like they are going to step into that phase and realm and open up. But when people sit down with you, I'm sure that there's a sense that kind of like the calmness that washes over, because there's just something about you and your energy too, right?
I think it's about creating containers for men where they feel safe too.
It's your authenticity as well. I think that makes it a little different, right? Because sometimes we sit down with people, whether it's a therapist or a counselor, and it almost feels like a blind date, right? Where you have this wall up and they have a wall up, and nobody knows how much they want to let their wall down, because when you have a relationship like that, the therapist is not intended to expose or share themselves, right? Or counselor's not there to do that. They're just there to listen and hear you and help guide you.
For sure.
And that's almost the intimidating part, right? Because you're sitting and you're exposing yourself completely to someone who's not. And so I think the difference when it comes to somebody sitting down with you and talking to you, even though the mission is the person that you're working with. You've already shared a lot of yourself and who you are, and there's like this vulnerability already about you, and I think that's very unique to what you do.
True. And I think to touch on your point is, the idea of therapist, counselor, or whatever is, and even just the way we live, there's this idea of hierarchy and expertise. And I think one of my biggest missions is equality, and I might have a background in a certain area, but I'm just as equal as you are, and I think that needs to be more of the conversation.
I love that.
You can feel safe.
I love that perspective.
It doesn't matter what you have, who you are, how much schooling or education, what level of director or executive you are, how much money you have, what you have. Like, put me in a room with you, a basic room, just the two of us. We're two human beings, and I think that's a huge thing for me, is that I'm no better than anyone that's willing to like share their story or their journey.
What would you say your purpose is? What's your purpose?
That's a really good question. I think my purpose is to heal myself through others. I think that,
I love that.
I think my purpose is to find myself through other people.
Do you feel like you're doing that?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's so beautiful. It really is.
You know what? I haven't known you for very long, but just even seeing the transformation from like meeting you at that workshop to now, and just like your progression and your growth, and just like this being and confidence, like it's impressive, and it's like inspiring as well.
Thank you.
And just seeing even the progression and like what you're doing, right? Like, when we first connected about what you do, you were on a very like, I wouldn't say beginner level, but you were figuring it out. Like,
for sure.
What was your thing? What is your niche? What is your specific, thing that makes you that people would be drawn to? And to see you have created like Oracle City and the sound healing and all of these things, and then to do your independent like sessions as well. You know, it's nice to see the progression for you as well. So I think you're like achieving your purpose, if my opinion counts.
I appreciate it for sure. I mean, I think to open up the conversation is there's always been self-criticism and even like self-loathing of like trying to figure it out, you know. And I think any entrepreneur, like, there's no doubt that this is my path and my journey, and I haven't always been successful, but I've just never quit. I think that that's something that's been really important for me to say. But throughout the whole time, there's been this like self-critic that I've had to work through. And I think one thing is to just like keep going at it, and it'll finally refine. Because I had like, before I even knew you, I had like radical development. It like went nowhere. And then I started building Essence and Impact with like another creative partner. And I learned so much about being in a partnership. And, you know, it's only now, basically 3 years into my new career, have I gotten a lot clearer. And I think it's about really embracing the truth, because I've been very hard on myself in the sense of I love so many things. I want to try so many things. And I've had so many people say to me, well, you got to focus on one thing. And I'm like, but that's not who I am. Yeah. I want to enjoy all of these things. So OC is so much about like bringing so many different things, elements to one place.
Into all of it.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's funny because I kind of relate that back to the podcast. And you were saying something earlier about like doing what you do so that you can help people as a community. Yeah. And it's funny because, and like, you know, it not being necessarily about me and like my ego, but like I love doing these podcasts because, one, I think I said on the check-in with Keith that we did on episode 7, we talked about like, I have some dope ass friends. Yeah. And I feel so blessed that every time I sit down and think of like, who do I want to sit down and talk to next, that I just have this like never ending like roster of people that I think bring really amazing things to like the community, and I can sit down with them and somehow thematically all of these dots like connect, you know, like I'm relating back to the last episode or episode 3 or, you know. Yeah. And every episode I do that because there's something that happens that like washes over all of the episodes that connects back to each other and the messaging, you know. And for me, it's been very therapeutic. I've learned a lot about myself, even just in like 9 episodes, you know. But absolutely, I'm learning about the people that I'm exposed to. I'm learning about what they do for other people. And it's like, I don't know, it's just very like therapeutic to me as well. So I feel like for anyone who listens, if it's not this episode, maybe it's the last one that they connected with, you know. So that's why I'm hopeful that people continue to listen, because if the last episode didn't resonate, maybe this one will, because I'm talking about something completely different with somebody totally different, but you know, things connect. So taking it to kind of like, you know, it's funny because I didn't say this at the beginning of the episode, but we decided to name this episode like Light into Dark, right? Yeah. And we talked about, you know, some of the dark periods that you kind of went through, and, you know, I've gone through my fair share as well. And it's funny because I think that right now I'm probably at my best, if you will. Like, you know, mentally I'm in a good place. In my intimate relationship, I'm in a good place. My friendships, I've gotten really particular about, like, again, who I keep at my table, who's around me and stuff. And I think that it goes back to what you were saying, you know, like all of that feeds into like who you are and what your spirit feels like.
Every single thing does, for sure.
So talk to me kind of about like your personal relationships, right? Like, I'm not asking you to like deep dive into like, you know, but like what has this experience done for you in terms of like your personal relationships, your friendships, partnerships?
Like experience with OC, or just like the last few years, or
just like the last few years of kind of like exposing yourself more and more to this, because you talk a lot about like what it's done for you individually, but how have you seen it resonate in like your relationships?
I mean, I think
have you lost a lot of them, or have you gained?
I lost relationships when I stopped drinking, for sure. I lost like friends who I thought were really good friends that weren't actually my friends. I think that was like
because the basis was
like social,
got
which
it.
was tough, and that was partially my responsibility, and then also just realizing, you know, how people serve us. But I think it's safe to say that relationships are the most difficult aspect of life, I think. And not difficult in the sense that they're hard, but just
navigating.
Yeah, like we all just have such a background to come together and try and find our way and have understanding or compassion or
Keith
acceptance.
Calls it luggage. We all come into with luggage.
For sure. We come with so much. So I would say with relationships, well, one is I can only love someone as much as I'm willing to love myself. I can only nurture someone as much as I'm willing to nurture myself. I remember one of the biggest things at that workshop that I met you was helping people realize that the only constant is you, and that everything outside of you is external, everything that is outside of you has an opportunity to change.
Yep.
So that's been a huge thing for me. I've had to let go. I'm not a controlling person, but I definitely
this is going through my head right now. Like, it does go back to that, like, the need to have everything the way you want it.
And I think sometimes as a creative or an entrepreneur, or, you know, those are all elements of like, this is mine, this is my control, I get to call the shots. And I've really had to learn in relationships with people that I have no idea how you're going to show up, I have no idea how you're going to react, how you're going to respond, who you're going to be, and allowing people to be them. And I think also I've really learned to be okay, and it's been huge for me to grow and mature, is I'm not afraid to lose people anymore.
Same.
That's a huge thing to be able to be free, because as women or as people, we will modify our personalities because we're scared to lose you. And I've lived enough now to be like, if someone's meant to stay in my life or be in my life or have this relationship, it's gonna work, and we're gonna make it work. So I can be free, and if you want to go, you can go. And that's been something that has been helpful for me to learn, because love isn't necessarily a relationship that's active. I still love people who have left my life. They maybe don't think I do or don't know that I do, but I still have so much love for you, even if you're not in my life. And I
agree completely.
Something that I think is huge.
I've had that conversation multiple times with different people, just kind of like, it goes back to, I never get the wording of this right, but like, people are in your life for a season, a reason, or a lifetime, right?
My mom always says that to me.
Yeah, but it's true. And my mom used to say you can only count your real friends on one hand.
Yeah.
But you know, everybody comes into your life for a reason.
Yeah.
They also leave when their time, you know, when that relationship has expired.
Yeah.
But it goes back to what you're saying, right? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of the sentiment that you had for that relationship goes out the door when they leave. It might just mean that it doesn't belong at this place and at this time anymore. So,
and I think that's actually been one of the difficult parts of relationships, is to discern who you want to work for and how much effort you put into something, or who you're willing to like step back and allow people to just do their thing. That's something for me, because like, you know, quality of life comes from effort, and we need effort in every area of our life, and that includes relationships. So that's been something that I'm like still learning.
I like the idea of the understanding. I think people need to be more conscientious about the fact that what you said about the only constant is yourself. And it kind of goes back to like, again, the last episode where Miguel was talking about me versus me. It's like, the only person that's going to wake up and like run or get your shit together is you. So like, you can't be, nobody else is responsible for you. You can make people feel accountable for you, but they're not. Truthfully, you're accountable for yourself, right? And so harshly remembering that the only constant is you is like, you have to have a very good relationship with yourself. And, you know, we always hear people say that, especially when it comes to like dating and intimate relationships, like, you can't be with somebody, you can't love somebody if you don't love yourself, right? And it's like, it's such a cliche thing, but it really is a fact, because if you are not comfortable in your own self, who you are, facing your hard truths about yourself, then like, how are you supposed to accept somebody else's flaws and imperfections and challenges, you know?
It's a lot of work. I think like, work. Let's just even put like how much work it is to take care of ourselves, to love ourselves. And self-love has become such a, you know, a loud idea, and it's a truth, but it has become so loud as well. And self-love is not just like bubble baths and candles and like eating right,
it's like
it's like looking yourself in the mirror and really being able to admit how much pain you're in, or what you're actually going to do, or where you need to admit your wrongs. And it takes a lot of work to take responsibility for ourselves. It's not just like lotion.
The thing that's
you know what I mean, like
not the body work.
You know what I'm saying?
You know, it takes a strong person also to be aware that the person that you maybe are deciding to share those harsh truths with, or ask to like have your things resonate with them, that the other person might not be in the same place that you're in. And that can be a struggle as well, because you might be trying to be this elevated person and grow, you know, internally, and share it with somebody who's possibly not understanding that mindset, knows not necessarily because that's their fault, but necessarily knows how to value that. Right?
Yeah.
They have their own work to do, and they might not even know it yet, right?
It's so true. Yeah, tolerance has been something I've really had to learn too, right? Because we don't want to give up on people just because of where they're necessarily at, but we have to give people the capacity to at least try.
Yeah.
Like, I love my mom. She might hear this, she might not. And we're definitely on different spiritual journeys. And I remember I gave her this profound book, this spiritual book that I just was so immersed in and thought it was so fantastic. I passed it on to her to read it.
I'm laughing because I feel like I know your reaction.
I passed it on to her to read it. And she was taking forever to read it. And my perception that I took on was she doesn't care. She doesn't care about the work that I do, and she doesn't care what I'm doing. And I remember, like, I was packing up my stuff or something, and I was like, I'm going to take this book back. And she was like, well, I'm not done reading it yet. I'm like, well, you don't really care. And we got into this argument about this book. And I saw my mom's vulnerability so real in this moment. She's like, I'm trying. She was like, I'm trying to get through this. This is hard for me. Like, I'm trying. It makes me emotional to think about it because I was so hard on her because I thought that she wasn't willing, but she was. She was just at her own pace. Yeah. And I think with others, we have to give people the grace to be like, okay, if you're gonna try, let me like give you some grace and patience. And that's
grace is a very powerful word, and I don't think people think about it enough. And it's interesting that you chose that word, because I feel like we live in such a fast world and such a high pressure environment all the time that we forget that people need a little bit of like grace and patience. And it doesn't mean don't have boundaries, but you have to be able to distinguish the difference between somebody who needs that grace and patience and boundaries. So talk to me about something that I'm like, I'm always intrigued by. It's why I stop on the videos. Like, talk to me about astrology and like what, like I'm always like, let me hear what she has to say about my side.
It's so much fun, I think the element of that life for me is like, it's fun and it's creative and it's magical, but it's also like very scientific driven. It's very art driven. It's sort of a blend of the two. I think a big point that I like to make is that if we believe that we have more important strength or presence than the stars in the cosmos do, like if we think that we're bigger than that, like we need a reality check, because that's way bigger than us, right? It's been here way longer than we've been, and it's science. So I think that's like something I like to preface before people kind of roll their eyes. And I've kind of been into it for the last 10 years. I remember my first reading was probably 10 years ago. It just really helps you understand certain facets of your life, like what your weaknesses are and where you can highlight. Like, I know that you're a Leo, I'm a Capricorn, and even in those two embodiments, like coming from a place of confidence and being self-driven and making things happen and going after what you want and believing in yourself, versus someone who's also highly career-driven, a lot of wisdom, someone who climbs and climbs and climbs as the Capricorn archetype is. There's so much that goes into it. I'll always suggest someone to get a birth chart reading and have a conversation with an astrologer that has a solid background. But I just think it's an element to play. It's an element that is innate within you. And it's given me, with the ceremonies that we do, it's so cool to see how the full moon and like the new moon is really this incredible cycle. And if you come to a ceremony, you will be astounded because they're so magical.
I'll come. I'll be there soon.
But I think, even when you hear the word Oracle City, there's like a sparkle to it.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that that's a part of who I am.
And intrigue.
Yeah, like magic and sparkle. But astrology is so cool. And I suggest everyone to understand a little bit more about themselves. It's also from like a compatibility and like friendship standpoint.
I agree. Do you ever deep dive, I know that there's like, this is your moon sign, this is your sun sign, and then there's like numbers and like specifics, like, I know that I might be a different Leo than someone who's born 2 weeks prior to me or whatever, Based look at those variations and everything.
Yeah, I'm not an astrologer, so I
like it.
Yeah, I just love it. Yeah. I really do. And I'm a coach and a speaker, so I usually will absorb information and then can facilitate it.
And she literally walked in and looked at Keith and was like, "So what is your sign?"
Pisces. As he's creatively setting up everything with not saying anything. It's like full Pisces mode. There's so much that goes into it, and I like to say, I'm not an astrologer. I've been looking at it and studying it. I read about it all of the time, and then I facilitate it sort of in this space. But you have 12 houses. Every single person has each little zodiac in themselves, depending on your moon, your ascendant, your Venus, your Mars. It's cool. It's cool to know. who you are.
It's interesting because it's a deeper connection to like the universe and the environment that connects back to you. And I've always been intrigued by it.
Yeah, and it's like okay to play and have fun.
Yeah, like what's the harm in thinking that these things are, you know,
totally. I think that's the thing as we get older. And something that I really want to embody is like, it's okay to play. It's okay to believe in the magic. It's okay to let go.
Yep.
It's okay to believe in something maybe you don't believe in, but whatever. It's just.
So I have an interesting question for you.
Yeah.
So one of my very good friends, I call her like my sister. She's a very spiritual person. She does a lot of moon readings and all of these things. She considers herself a witch.
Yes.
So what is your perspective on this word? You know, because there's a lot of stigma around that.
Yeah.
And for someone who's very open about it, like herself, you know, she's gone on dates and like tells people, and people are either like, what the fuck? Or they're intrigued by it, or they're a spiritual person that already knows what she means when she says what she says, and is able to connect with it. So like, what are your thoughts on that, or like what do you think it means? And
interesting. Okay, so I'll say
I curveballed you.
No, that's
curveballed you.
That's okay. No, I mean, here's some truth about it. As a woman, your sacral and womb creative area is a powerful manifesting center. Okay. Like it is a powerful space to be. And as a woman, you can really, if you have clarity of mind, if you sit in meditation, we all have the ability to manifest. You know, as humans, we have powers. I'm not saying we're all magicians, but what I'm saying is we know how to manifest things. That is, we're energy. That's just what it is. So I think like when it comes to the witch area, it's fun for you. If you claim that, if you want to claim the fact that you can make things happen, that you know how to manifest, that you have powers, then believe it. I think like believing whatever your truth is going to manifest in your life. But I do think that as women, you know, and talking about the chakra system, your third eye gives you an opportunity to see things clearly. I would say water signs like Pisces, Cancer, Scorpio, they mostly have an intuition and an ability about them to see things before they happen, to intuitively pick up on others. So, you know, the witch idea for sure, manifestation, psychic abilities, clairvoyance, clairaudience. I think it's all real and cool. And, you know, I love it.
I love spirituality in general.
The only thing I think when people hear witch is like, I'm going to cast a spell on you.
Yeah.
And I don't believe in like black magic because I believe in karma, and I would never put anything against anyone, because it all comes back. Yes. And I think like sometimes that witch idea of like they're going to do something to me and I'm going to get it. It's like, I wouldn't be too worried about that. We don't want
any bad vibes over here. No bad juju. I wanted to ask you like, what's next for you? What's in the stars for you? What's next for you? What do you think is next for you? And what do you want to be next for you?
Yeah.
What have you been manifesting?
That's a good question. I mean, building community is huge for me. I'd really like to see it get a lot larger. I want people to find their place.
I would love to be a part of it.
Yeah, you gotta come.
At my event planner side, I'm willing to help you with whatever.
Amazing. So I think like building the community is definitely important to me. I would say having more confidence for self-promotion, because I kind of like tend to be behind the scenes a lot of the time, is really important to me.
Need your Leo to come out.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. It's like actually an area of my life that's not that strong. Like, I definitely have an inner self-confidence, but when it comes to like, hey guys,
this is
come and see it.
Yeah,
I do struggle, and I think like I'm willing to admit that. But manifesting more ceremonies, more travel. My career is starting to get a little bit. Has become so much more clear that the conversation around partnership for me has gotten loud.
Business partnership?
No, like romantic.
Personal.
Yeah. I've been single for 4 years.
Ready to mingle. No, I'm just joking.
Yeah. I mean, family has been something that's really come up, but yeah, I think it's just really about getting clear on my vision and my mission and sharing it and keeping on going. Like my career has always been the most important thing to me, and it's taken me time to get clear. And
but
so
I think your career is so much more than just your career. It's who you are as a person.
It's so true.
And your career is connected to your spirituality, your mindset, all of that. So for the focus, for that to be your primary and only focus, only makes sense, because you've now figured out so much about yourself. As an individual, that like putting that on but seriously, like putting that on the back burner would only be like, you know, detrimental to you. And so now you're in the best place for like knowing what's next for you in terms of a personal relationship.
Yeah. I also think like I want to learn through commitment. I think that there's something that comes along with when you decide to like commit to something or someone, and what comes up for you to be able to, like, I think that's my next sort of spiritual assignment is how can I manage this, what I'm building, but also have someone in my corner that really supports and that accepts and understands me. I think like acceptance and understanding is huge for me, but I'm like
smiling,
manifesting love, hopefully.
She's manifesting some love.
I hope so.
I'm smiling because I'm kind of curious about like what dating someone like you would be like, because
I'm not all composed like this all the time.
Well, it's funny because I went to school and did a lot of social work, but my focus was mostly like youth and adolescents, right? But following that, I worked in foster care for a few years, and I worked with children that were dealing, well, not children, adults as well, but it was like dealing with children because a lot of them had fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, right? Yeah. So, physically they're a 25-year-old or a 28-year-old or a 30-year-old, but in their brain, in their physicality, it's like dealing with a child. And depending on at what point their mother drank during their pregnancy, I could be dealing with a 25-year-old that responds like a 5-year-old or a 25-year-old that responds like a really upset 17-year-old,
Really? Yeah.
So you didn't ever really know quite what you were getting with this package of a human being, right? And that's the same for anybody, but there was a very unsure, uncertainty. So it's kind of interesting because a lot of what I studied was like nonviolent crisis intervention or like conflict prevention and all of these things, right? That like really taught you how to deal with someone from a very standard place, right? Like really like being on a level playing field with them. Yeah, very objectively and respectfully, right? Like understanding that somebody coming to you is coming to you because, like, if they're dealing with a problem or a situation, they're coming to you because they are being a little bit more vulnerable, right? And so going into personal relationships, like, Keith knows we struggle with this a little bit. I'm someone who wants to resolve, and that comes a lot from that background, right? Like, I always want to just like fix and resolve and talk it through and whatever. And not everybody responds like that. Sometimes people need space to step away, and that's something that we're still learning. But like, I always think it's interesting for someone like yourself, who has all this education and all this experience and all this exposure and understands different types of people, like what it could be like to be in a relationship with someone like that, right? Because like, will that person feel like you're like psychoanalyzing them? I don't know.
I know that's tough too. I get that. I mean, I think I've had some recent conversations, even just like with dating here and there. I just have to be with someone that's willing to do the work as well, because, I've done enough work now that if you say something to me and it makes me feel overwhelmed, and from your perspective you have no idea that that's happened, and I'm explaining to you that when you say this in this tone of voice, it reminds me of this, and I feel like this.
I'm hinting at
Do you know what I mean? Well, like when I do that, they could be like, what the fuck are you talking about?
You could say that.
Or they're like, I totally see where you're coming from. Let me be receptive. So it makes the difference as to, are they doing the work so that they can understand me? I think that's like a big thing, and that's not always easy to find. But also, I think for me is when I've noticed, like, when I have really intense emotional feelings, I tend to want to run. So it's also like me too, like looking at what, like, am I like sticking it out when things for me get tough? And
that goes back to the commitment thing,
for sure, exactly. So seeing like how I can show up in commitment based on knowing my own patterns.
Really curious to see when this person comes into your world, what this will play out like.
And you're like one of the second people that have said that to me recently, because they're just, who are you going to end up partnering with? I don't know. I could also be one of those people who just ends up, a solo angel.
Or not solo, multiple.
We'll see, or multiple.
Plenty of partners. No, it's interesting because hearing you say that, part of my growth of my relationship with Keith really came from a place that he was in a very spiritual place, right? Like, he was someone that
a Pisces would be.
Yeah. He struggled with a lot of his past, I did as well. And for him, he was very focused on self and growing and healing and assessing. And I kind of think that I was so used to comfortability. Like, I had a very, I guess, routine relationship starter kit that was kind of like, I know someone, I'm comfortable with them. I don't necessarily put in all the work. They don't put in all the work. And we kind of just are like, now you're my partner, you know?
Totally.
And to be with somebody who's done a lot of their own individual work is so different.
It is.
Because it really makes you like stop and reassess.
Yeah.
And you have to actually, instead of just hearing someone, you actually have to listen to what that person is saying, because they've spent a lot of time figuring these things out about themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we're still like learning and growing. But I mean, that takes time, but it's very different than being with someone who hasn't spent that time figuring their own shit out.
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's also
like,
like you're going to attract who you are, right? Like, really, I think that's a big thing. And I think for me too, is I just won't settle for anything less than what makes me feel like
great
magic. Yeah. Like, I want magic.
She wants to feel like magic.
I want full magic in my life.
I think we should play this or that.
Okay.
I'm just skimming to make sure I got to talk to you about all the things I want to talk to you about. But let's play a game of this or that. I just want to say this was, I stumbled on my words a lot on this pod, but just because I'm like thinking of all the things connected to you, and just like this for me was a very like profound conversation. And I hope anyone listening kind of like, we talked about this episode, and I'll be very transparent here. Before I start an episode, I always touch base with a person that I'm going to sit down with and share with them the context of the conversation. I never create interview questions. I never want this to be like anything less than an organic conversation. I think this was, a great example of that. But we talked about the episode being called, is this your sign, or something along the realms of that, right? Or like, if you're looking for a sign, this is it, right? And I think for anyone listening, I would hope that this opens up something for them internally that allows them to dig a little deeper, or want to pursue digging a little deeper if they're not doing so already. But yeah, this was just really profound for me, even to just dig a little deeper into like who you are and what you're doing, because, we met at an event that was like a professional thing for you, right? But like, we've grown a little bit of a personal relationship on the side, and we have a mutual friend, which is lovely as well. But we've grown, our communication has grown over like the last year or so, and now it's like 2 years.
Yeah, I met you 2 years ago. I know.
But yeah, so to be able to sit down with you and dig a little deeper into this, and like have conversations with you about it that are not in the midst of you, working is really refreshing. And I hope that it connects with somebody and actually is a sign for them, like, to do the work, or to want to be more vulnerable, or want to be around people who are doing the work and are vulnerable.
I hope so. I think that's literally the answer to the planet, is that if you can work on yourself, then everyone around you will
when is that ever a bad thing?
I know. Well, I mean, it's the answer. It really is. If everyone had a better relationship with themselves, they'd be kinder. They'd be more considerate of the planet. They'd be a lot more willing. They'd be open to their families. Like, it really comes down to relationship with self at a primary level. I think that is the most important thing you can do.
I love it. Okay, so let's do a little this or that. And I was
just like speed round, like you're gonna go.
It's kind of like, say the first thing you think about. We might dig a little bit into your answer, because I might be curious. But let's see what we got. Okay.
I love it.
Would you rather always be 10 minutes late or always 20 minutes early?
20 minutes early.
Ooh, love it. Is that part of your sign?
Oh yeah, that's Capricorn energy for sure.
Okay, this is a weird one. Would you only use a fork and you wouldn't have a spoon, or only use a spoon and you can never use a fork?
Fork.
Why? I'm curious.
I don't know.
What if you need to eat soup?
I feel like spoons are like just too much metal. I don't like
That's
it.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. This is interesting because we talked about sound being so important, but we also talked about health being so important. Would you rather give up music for an entire month?
Never.
Or would you rather give up fitness for an entire month?
I would never give up music.
She would never give up music.
I'd give up fitness for a month for sure.
Yeah? She'll just, her music is
so
her
healing.
fitness. I know.
Music is so healing.
If you had to name your favorite artist, who would it be?
Oof, off the top of my head, right now, probably Frank Ocean.
I love that.
Yeah.
Is it his voice? Is it his lyricism?
I think it's genius, and I think like look how relevant he still is without having putting something out for so long. It's his lyrics, it's his writing,
even his creative branding is so genius. Yeah, it's true. Okay, let me find something. I haven't done a lot with other people. Okay, you were talking about traveling. Would you rather never leave the city you were born in, or move to a new city every single week?
Oh, move to it. Oh, wait. Can you say it again? Never leave Toronto.
Never leave Toronto.
Yeah.
Or have to move every single week.
Every week, for sure.
I would do it too.
Yeah.
I would do it too.
Every
so
week.
much exposure to things. Okay, let me see what else we got. I kind of don't feel like I know the answer to this one. I'm going to ask you anyways. Would you rather be forced to dance every time you hear music or forced to sing every time you hear music?
Forced to dance.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Oh, so she's a singer, but she really
I love
likes
to dance. I love to dance so much.
Do you think that a lot of, this is just an aside, do you think a lot of who you were, you know, as a party girl, or do you think a lot of that changed, like loving music or loving to dance or anything that changed with your sobriety? Or did you just find a new way to enjoy these things? This is me, like, I'm not someone, actually, I'm the exact opposite. Mm. I'm not a big drinker, and when I drink, I pretty much have a cap. I've never smoked anything. I've never done any recreational drugs ever. Like, I'm pretty square in that realm, if you had to put a name on it. But it's funny because growing up, when a lot of people were trying things and doing things, I was always kind of like, no, I'm not high. I'm just like, I am a high. Like, I'm a high, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you, I guess, is like the opposite for me. Like, I often wonder, would I be a completely different person if I explored those things? Like, what would my good time feel like or look like, or would it be the opposite? You know what I mean? Like, would I be this paranoid, uncomfortable person?
It's so interesting. There's a couple points to that. So I think, like, I would drink or smoke weed to feel like I had to be a certain version of myself. I also think I'm the same way. Like, I have definitely deal with anxiety, but I have like a really high vibrational personality, and I would even drink to bring that down because there weren't many people that could meet me at that level. Also, I don't know why it snapped in, but I think a lot of my drinking and smoking and a lot of that really even started because I wanted to be more accepted in the Black community. Okay. Because I grew up with my white mom and my white family, and the parties that I started to go to, like, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Escape Nightclub, but like, I used to think that was like my jam at like 17, 18 years old, and it was this entry point of like, wow, there's this Black community that I've been missing my whole life, and now I feel like I'm a part of something. So it's interesting that for many years that was a big thing for me. I just wanted to be like accepted in the Black community because I felt like I wasn't.
Will you come back on an episode and talk more about that with me?
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I would love to talk to you more about that because it actually like popped in my head a little bit about, you know, who you are and your background as well, because I think that also it goes back to trauma, and not to say that that's traumatic, right? But like, it is part of your identity, I think. And, you know, where you're accepted, where you feel comfortable, who you feel you are. I remember when I was in high school, I was part of like the Free the Children, like community program stuff. Yeah. And we did this like overnight event in a high school, like a bunch of reps from each high school, like slept at a high school overnight, and we did all these like workshops. And there was a girl there, and I remember her name was Sarah, and she was mixed, and she was multiracial. And she was like, growing up, people used to be like, well, what are you? Like, are you Black? Totally. Are you white? Are you Asian? Like, what are you? Totally. And she would be like, I'm me. I'm Sarah. Yeah. Like, I don't know how to answer that question.
I'm the same way.
And as a little girl, you know, like, how do you answer that? Because people are expecting you to have an answer. And then, you know, your Black community might be expecting you to say, well, I identify this way. Or your white community might, you know. Yeah. So
it's interesting.
I would love to dive deeper into that, and maybe how that connects with your spirituality and you know, who you are. And again, you just tied it back to kind of like, you know, the smoking and the drinking and stuff, and feeling like a bit of identity there. So I would love if you would come back and talk about that stuff another time.
The biracial conversation is really interesting. It got really loud too, like last year when things came up, of course, with like George Floyd and whatnot. Because it just wasn't something that was talked about for me. And that's the same way. It's like, I don't identify as Black or white. Like, I never even think that I show up as a Black woman in the world. Like, I forget that a lot of the time.
Interesting.
And to be honest, I think it's even come up more around the spirituality component, because I don't see a lot of Black women facilitating spiritual endeavors, as well as any personal development work that I do. I look around the room and there's not a lot of faces of color. And why is that? You know, is it because they haven't been introduced, or it's just really, it is an interesting conversation. And being a Black woman, being able to start those conversations for BIPOC communities being a person of color in the spiritual realm, because I think personal development and spirituality kind of leans one way sometimes. So
I also feel like, I mean, and this is my own perspective, you know, I'm a white woman, so I could be completely wrong, but like I grew up predominantly surrounded by a black community.
Yeah.
I lived in black homes growing up when my parents were separated and stuff. And I think that one thing that comes with the black community is they are taught to not be vulnerable and to not share a lot of their, emotions and expose themselves in very spiritual ways a lot of the time outside of their community, right? So I think a lot of that also ties in there.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong, but I feel like that's the experience that I witnessed and I was exposed to, right? I think when it comes to spirituality, a lot of the black community is taught to do that in church or, in their own culture and community.
Yeah, it's so true.
Not be vulnerable and not overshare and overexpose. And that's just a protective historical mechanism. But that's like such a deep dive. But I would love to talk to you more about that stuff.
Yeah, that's actually important to me too, to try and find ways to break down those walls.
Well, I mean, I think you're probably learning as well, right? Because especially if you were raised by a white mom, like, your exposure is different as well. And you have to figure a lot out as well.
Yeah.
All right, I'll do one more this or that with you. Let me find a good one. I feel like they're all like sticking to them. Let's see what we got. What's one we haven't done? Okay. So this is one that's kind of come up a lot, but I'm interested because just knowing who you are and like, in nature and spirituality, but like, would you rather live in a cabin in the woods or live on a beach?
Live on a beach.
Yeah. Me too.
The ocean's so powerful.
Well, the ocean, I guess, goes back to the sound baths as well, right? Like
water's so calming for humans. It really is. It's
healing. Feels like it's washing things out.
I love the beach. I love the beach so much.
Please tell people that want to reach out to you or just follow what you do, where they can find you and, things they can be a part of.
Thank you. oraclecity.ca is my platform. You can book a personal call with me on there if you want to, just elaborate on where you're at. You can purchase tickets to a moon ceremony on that platform as well. You can go to Oracle City Toronto, which is my Instagram. And some of the programming that I'm rolling out is Sober City, which is creating awareness and conscious conversation, 6-week programming on being sober curious. Like, what does that look like in your life? That's something that I've been focused on and trying to find.
I love that. Sober curious.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's some programming, and we'll probably do some astrology programming a little bit down the line, but I would say ultimately coming to ceremony and getting connected to that element of you is a really great start. Also picking up the phone and just starting to talk about where you're at.
Just connect really with you, important.
Right? Yeah.
If nothing else, sitting in a room with Nicole when you're trying to meditate and your eyes are closed and you're just hearing her speak and like the sound bath is happening, like that is just therapeutic in itself.
You.
So highly recommend.
You're so kind.
But thank you so much for coming on this episode. For anyone listening, I appreciate you listening, and I hope that this connected with you in some way. Please share this with people because I feel like if it didn't connect with you, it might connect with somebody else. But you can catch every episode on all major streaming platforms, Google Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, everything.
I didn't even know that.
And if you want to watch the video and see the lovely Nicole speaking, YouTube, it's 818 and Conversate. And episodes drop the 8th and the 18th of every month at 8:18 p.m. Do you know any numerology? Tell me something about it.
Yes, I do.
Tell me before we jump off.
Life Path 9. I don't know if you know that.
No.
Yeah, I do know numerology actually, but I think number 9 is like the humanitarian, which is quite fitting.
I think my number is actually a 9 when I do the like book of numerology and stuff.
You just add like your birthday.
Yeah.
You can do it like really fast.
Yeah.
But I know a little bit about numerology. I feel like it's about reincarnation. Like when you're at like 9, I'm in one of my last lives.
We're like cats.
Pretty much.
So we're pretty much like cats.
I know.
And is 818 a good number? Is 8 so good?
8 and 16 and 17 ends up being 8. So I guess it's all universal.
Amazing.
Like the universal truth.
So there you go.
There you go.
So please listen to every episode, like, subscribe, do all the things, but most importantly, I think share, because I would love people to hear the things that we're talking about on each episode. But This is episode 9 of 818 and Conversate, and thank you again.
Thank
I appreciate you so much.
It's been amazing chatting with you.
We'll have her back. She'll be back. So
yes.
This is episode 9, and we're out.
Thank you.